Greetings YouTube viewers and welcome to another video on the Theianbullock channel. It's Tuesday the 2nd of November 2021 and I'm recording this video here today at Lowestoft in Suffolk in East Anglia. We're on the east coast here facing out towards the North Sea, and I just thought I'd video this because we have the most lovely weather for November with this really lovely blue sky and sunny weather all day, hardly a breath of wind, which is quite unusual for the east coast. And I want to talk to you today about one of my favourite statues here in East Anglia. More of that in a moment. So here it is, my favourite statue here in Suffolk, in Lowestoft, and this is Triton, the sea god. And just to give you a closer look here, because there's funny little story associated with this. There are two of these statues actually. There's one here and there's one a fair way down the promenade down towards the pier there, and so there are two of them, a matching pair. I think they're identical actually. Now this was commissioned in 1850 by Sir Samuel Morton Peto. More of him in a moment. I'll talk about him in just a moment. But yes, Morton Peto commissioned this to mark the completion of the first phase of one of his investment projects in Lowestoft. He was an entrepreneur and was bankrolling some really significant building and development projects in the town in the sort of mid-1800s. But yeah, what we have here is, well, apart from the seagull on top, I'd be interested to hear what you think of it. But back in my day, in my childhood, so we're talking 50 years ago, I was always led to believe that this was Father Neptune, because of course we have the sea in the background there. And I was led to believe that this was Father Neptune who'd risen from the sea, if you like. I'll just focus in a little bit more on him here, if you can see him. And well, when I was a child, I was told he was Father Neptune, and for some reason, and I must have invented this, I assumed that he was grappling with a kind of really large sea creature of some kind. He's holding it by the tail, as you can see at the top there, and grappling with it as if it's attacking him, some kind of moray eel or something like that, sea serpent, something very romantic. And so yeah, really for, I suppose, half a century, I was under the impression that this was Father Neptune grappling with a sea serpent which had risen from the sea. And in fact, I was quite disappointed when I was looking up this information to discover that in fact this isn't Father Neptune with a sea serpent. It's actually Triton, who was the son of Poseidon, holding a cornucopia, which classic scholars will know is a kind of horn of plenty, and spilling out at the bottom there, you might just be able to see various fruits and flowers and fruits and the bounty of wealth. So I actually think my interpretation of it with the sea serpent was much more interesting and romantic, but that's what it is. It's not Father Neptune at all. Quite disappointing after 50 years of believing that story. And the one further down the prom is the same as well. So yeah, this was commissioned in 1850, created by the sculptor John Thomas, and I've read some reports saying that it's Bath stone and other reports saying that it's York stone. It was given listed status in 1993 as listed grade 2 listing, actually in 1993. It's not really withstood the sea air terribly well, but it was restored. There was a restoration project 1983 to 1985. I'll just take you around here so that you can see the sun shining on the back of Triton against that lovely blue sky. So yes, that was it. And I believe that the message with this statue, when Samuel Morton Peto commissioned it, was that the horn of plenty, the cornucopia, was really symbolic of the wealth that would flow into Lowestoft as a result of his development projects and inward investment. So I'll talk to you about him in just a moment. So that's it. This is Triton, not Father Neptune, and he's standing against the backdrop of the sea here in Lowestoft, Suffolk. So we have the seafront there at Lowestoft with the North Sea and one of the sandy beaches, but if I just swing round here, I'll just show you that I'm standing in the gardens facing the Wellington Esplanade here in Lowestoft, and this is an impressive, well, Victorian, really elegant Victorian terrace of townhouses. It was built by John Clements, and the whole scheme was dreamt up by Sir Samuel Morton Peto, who at one point was an MP, a Liberal MP I think, in Norwich, an entrepreneur, civil engineer, a sort of speculator, businessman, and he had a grand plan for Lowestoft, and this fantastic row of townhouses was one of the centerpieces of it. He helped to bring the railway to Lowestoft in the 1840s because he could see that towns like this in that era, when bathing and taking the waters at these coastal resorts was popular, he could see that this would bring some lucrative business to towns like Lowestoft, and I suppose ultimately, you know, Cromer and Great Yarmouth and Galston and other places like that. But he was focusing on Lowestoft. He had this grand plan. There are these, what I think probably were once incredibly elegant and fashionable gardens here in the foreground, which are possibly not quite what they were, but I believe the local authority is probably doing its best to try and keep them together. So yeah, he was a businessman and an entrepreneur, a true entrepreneur, who worked on various projects in London, around Europe, around England, and unfortunately he ultimately went bankrupt and died in 1889, I believe, as a fairly unknown, sort of died in obscurity really, which is a shame after the glory of such fantastic projects like this. I think he envisaged that Lowestoft would have a boom once it had its railway and buildings like this, and unfortunately he lost his seat as an MP, I think due to having been made bankrupt, and died in relative obscurity some years later. So yeah, a part of elegant Lowestoft back in the day, and still remains so. I think some of the buildings here have slightly changed. I love the chimney stacks, the big chimney stacks at the top. I think this has grade 2 listed status, and was built in 1852, 1853. And once again, as I've said before on many of my videos, looks fantastic set against this azure sky, autumnal sky. So this is the Wellington Esplanade at Lowestoft in Suffolk. So I'm just now standing at the front of Claremont Pier, which sticks out into the North Sea here in Lowestoft. Quite a well-known landmark here, and sort of divides the beach into two halves really. Well known really as a sort of a very large amusement arcade, and back in my childhood, goodness, the amount of money I used to spend on the slot machines and gaming machines, one-armed bandits and all sorts of things in there, and if I'd saved all that money I'd probably be a very, very wealthy chap by now. But yeah, it's busy. The amusement arcade is closed today, but what is interesting about this building is fairly recently someone has had the presence of mind to develop that rather lovely outdoor sort of terrace area at the top there, that's a kind of sports bar cafe with rather nice views looking out across the promenade and seafront here at Lowestoft. So yeah, they're investing in Claremont Pier, which is great, and a sign hopefully that a little bit more prosperity is coming to the town after a difficult few years, particularly with the coronavirus pandemic. So a nice place to have a pint of beer and look out over the sea here in Lowestoft. So as you can see, it's the most beautiful, beautiful day today here on Lowestoft Beach. masses of sand, which actually I think has been blown up by the recent high winds, and there's a digger at the moment redistributing some of the sand around, but it has this incredible wide sandy beach here at Lowestoft, much wider than I remember when I was a lad. And as I've said on previous videos, I used to come to Lowestoft a lot as a boy because my grandma, Doris Wilton, lived at 59 Carlton Road in Kirkley, and she had two sisters-in-law, Florence Took and Hilda Wilton, and they lived just a bit further along the road at number 45. And what we're looking at here are the beach huts, some of the beach huts this side of Claremont Pier, set against this fantastic autumnal blue sky. It's the 2nd of November, and we're lucky enough to have this fantastic weather here today. It's quite still, not that much wind. Back in the day when I suppose I was about 7, 8, 9, 10, that kind of age, this would have been in the 1970s, I used to come to Lowestoft a lot and go swimming with my great aunts, and they were quite well known in Lowestoft back in the day, particularly Hilda Wilton, Auntie Hilda, great Aunt Hilda, because she was very well known in the town as being a swimmer, a lifesaver. She worked at the telephone exchange, and back in the day she used to have the same beach hut. She used to hire it, I believe, every year, year in, year out, from the local council. I don't think she ever owned it, and she was a bit of a legend back in those days because she would hire the same beach hut, which I'm going to say was 229. Now, it wasn't any of these because these are relatively new additions to the beach, the seafront. She had a hut just around this area. I think it was 229, and she was famous because she used to come down here at the start of the season and right through to the end of the season. It felt when I was a boy almost as if she was here every day of the year, but that wasn't the case. But she was a very hardy, strong, powerful, competent swimmer, and whatever the weather, when I was younger, whatever the weather, even on the most terrible wild days, she and I would come down. When I was staying in Lowestoft, she and I would come down and get our costumes on, and however rough the waters were, we'd go out into the sea and face the waves. And sometimes it would just be the two of us in the water, and sometimes she was joined by her friends, who were, well, they were kind of mixture of aunts or great aunts and ladies who weren't actually aunts, who I called aunt. There was an Aunt Winifred, Auntie Ida, and then there was my Auntie Trudy, who was also known as Aunt Gertie. And these legendary ladies would put their black swimming costumes on, and whatever the weather, they would venture into the North Sea here at Lowestoft, and they wouldn't be deterred by the strong winds and high waves and the rain. And my Auntie Flo, Florence Took, I think she had a hut just a bit further along towards the pier there, which I think was number 444, but you'll forgive me for not remembering the detail because we're talking about probably 50 years ago. I mean, I could have been 8 and I'm now 58, so a long time ago. But yeah, they were great days, and life was really one long party at Auntie Hilda's hut, because people used to stop and chat, and she could talk for England, and they'd sit down at one of her deck chairs with her crocheted shawls all over them, and she'd make them a cup of coffee and a chocolate biscuit, and they'd talk all day really. So yeah, they were happy days. I often think of Aunt Hilda and Auntie Flo when I walk along here, but times have changed, and anyway, lovely memories from Lowestoft Beach, the most easterly point in the country here in Suffolk. So that's it from Lowestoft here in Suffolk on the 2nd of November 2021. Just a final shot looking out across the beach here, just north of the Claremont Pier. And actually on my channel, the Theianbullock channel, you'll find, if you just scroll through my videos, there was one where I actually went in the sea just down there opposite the Hatfield Hotel, and I took the phone in with me. So that's a sea swimming video taken a year or so ago actually. in the summer. So that's it from Lowestoft, Suffolk, England in the United Kingdom, November 2021.